Howdy, folks. Welcome to Redneck Gone Green. I'm your host, David Cobb. I am the redneck. You bet I've gone green, and I'm trying to get you to do it too. And as a reminder, as we do every week on this program, when we say go green, we ain't talking about mere environmentalism. We're talking about something deeper, true ecology. And whether you come at that from an eco-spiritual perspective or a hard science perspective, let me tell you this, that we are all interconnected on this web of life, and whatever we do to that web, we are ultimately doing to ourselves. And let's be honest, y'all, we doing it wrong. We're literally destroying the planet that we depend upon for life itself, creating a racist, sexist, and class oppressive society with the plunder. And with that, let's bring on our good pal, Shane Knight. Shane, how you doing, buddy?
I'm okay, man. It's been a long fucking day, and I've been out for 2 weeks. I've missed you. I've missed doing this. I'm also ridiculously pissed off.
Man, hey, look, you know what? There's that old saying, if you're not pissed off, you're not paying attention. And I will say, on the last two shows, Shane, live, several people in the comments section were asking about you, so you were missed. We're happy to have you back. And you came back on a great program because our guest today is probably the most famous Marxist economist in the U.S. today. Of course, I'm talking about Professor Rick Wolff. And before we bring him in, though, we're going to tee him up with the Tracking the Crisis from our good friends over at the Democracy Collaborative. You got that ready to go, Shane?
I do.
Welcome to this week's Tracking the Crisis, a weekly news roundup of Trump administration actions and movement responses. On Thursday, August 7th, Trump's tariffs for most of the world's countries officially went into effect, raising the average tariff rate to over 17%, the highest tax on imports and exports in the United States since the Great Depression. While Trump's much-touted 90 deals in 90 days fell short of its goal, Trump's art of the deal approach infuses his trade agenda, leveraging the threat of high tariffs to secure cash and investment deals from trading partners. Trump also demonstrated his use of tariffs as a political tool, imposing punitive tariffs on India for its imports of Russian oil. This puts India in the company of Brazil, who got a 50% tariff in retaliation for prosecuting disgraced former President Jair Bolsonaro, a Trump ally who attempted a coup in 2022. Brazilian President Lula da Silva appeared defiant, saying, "I won't humiliate myself by asking Trump for a deal." Instead, Lula is talking with India and other BRICS partners and requesting a formal consultation from the World Trade Organization. Economists warn of rising unemployment and burgeoning stagflation as the economy shows signs of cracking under the trade war pressure. Consumers are starting to feel the effect of tariffs on prices for everyday goods as U.S. companies are running out of options for avoiding inflation. Also on August 7th, Trump signed a new executive order allowing 401k retirement funds access to investment opportunities in alternative assets such as cryptocurrency, private equity, real estate, and other digital assets. Trump's order is a gift to the crypto and private equity industries that had spent big on Trump's election and inauguration, effectively bailing out the flagging private equity sector with access to the holy grail of over $12 trillion in fresh capital, while millions of workers' retirement savings will be exposed to higher risks and fewer investor protections. As the movements against the Trump agenda grow, activists use a diversity of tactics and share lessons learned. The group Choose Democracy has compiled a website for new activists outlining a menu of various actions people can initiate in their own communities, as well as resources for organizing. As members of Congress head back to their home districts for the August recess, Republican lawmakers tasked with selling the GOP narrative of the big, beautiful budget reconciliation bill are being eaten alive by angry constituents on issues ranging from the Epstein scandal to Medicaid cuts. Truth Out has featured discussions this week of the role of public assemblies as a way of strengthening community resistance to authoritarianism, and the importance for social movements of occupying and reclaiming physical space, not only for visibility, but also for prefiguring new forms of social authority and self-governance. The AFL-CIO is continuing their Better in a Union bus tour over the next several weeks to support contract fights around the country and calling on the public to push their representatives to pass the Protect America's Workforce Act as a countermeasure to Trump's executive orders stripping collective bargaining rights from federal workers. Korean university student Yeon-soo Go was released this week from ICE custody thanks to community pressure from outraged neighbors and friends. Go's mother told reporters there's more in there who need the support. That's it for this week's Tracking the Crisis. Read more by signing up for our weekly news roundup in your email every Friday at trackingthecrisis.org. Back to you, David and Shane.
You know, Shane, normally you and I chop it up a little bit before we bring in our guests, but I can't think of anybody I'd rather react to that video than Professor Wolff. Y'all, here's the quick introduction. He needs no introduction on this platform, but what I'm going to say is this. Professor Wolff breaks it down without dumbing it down better than anybody that I have ever met. He helps to make sense of macroeconomic principles. He brings it into real world perspective and does political education as well as I've seen anybody do. And with that, let's welcome Professor Richard Wolff.
Well, I'm going to try real hard to live up to that very sweet introduction. Thank you, David, first of all, for being so kind, and to both you and Shane for inviting me to talk a little bit. My reaction to that clip you just showed, you know, it's a little bit like my reaction almost every day when I pick up the newspaper and read the latest stuff. I shake my head. And I do it because part of me can't quite believe what this government is trying to put over on the mass of the American people. The nerve they have to try, if they're having some success, I'm amazed at that. And I'm confident, I really am, that in a very short time, and I'm counting in terms of weeks and months, this is going to come back, what they are doing, to bite them in the rear end in a way that will be even more amazing to folks like us than what they've already done. It's really extraordinary. Let me start a little bit with some of the economics, since that's what I know best. This business of heaving tariffs at everybody in the world, threatening and demanding that they come, just as Mr. Lula refused to do, and as the Chinese laugh at every time he does it, as if the world wants to come and get on its knees and beg the dear Mr. Trump to give them a break. I understand why he loves it. That's who he is. That's his politics. That's what the people who support him like to see him do. But in terms of an economic policy, let me give you just a little idea, if you haven't figured it out for yourself, of what's going on here. First of all, you should have noticed by now, even if you don't think there is a world outside the United States, that Mr. Trump has attacked, in economic terms, every other country on the planet. Nobody does that. Nobody ever has done that. That is
Nobody's dead orange either.
Yeah, it's off the wall. It's off the wall. It means, let's be real clear. If you put a tariff on, that's a tax. Never mind the funny story we ought to be telling each other here in America, where we've watched the Republican Party be the party against taxes for the last century, the party that prides itself on always cutting them or lowering them or opposing them. A tariff is a tax, which means the leader of the Republican Party is slapping the whole world with taxes. That's what this is. This is the anti-tax party having made an absolute U-turn to be the big tax party. And in case, again, people are a little fooled by his rhetoric, when he says, I'm going to hit China with a tax be very careful here. The tariff that Mr. Trump creates doesn't hit China. U.S. tariffs are paid by U.S. businesses, not by Chinese businesses or Chinese people. None of that. Every one of the taxes, no matter what country it is thrown up against in his language, is a tax on American businesses. It's payable when you bring anything produced outside the United States into the United States to be sold. And that's 90% companies that do that. There are some individuals, but it's mostly a company business. So then the real question is, these companies now have to pay the overseas source of whatever they bring in, plus the tariff to Uncle Sam. And it's now in the billions of dollars. Well, then the logical question, just ask yourself, what is the American business that has to pay the tax to Uncle Sam going to do about the fact that their profits are hurt because in addition to buying whatever they sell in America from abroad, they have to pay Uncle Sam a brand new tax once that tariff is in effect. Well, I'll tell you what the American corporation is going to do. It's going to try to shift the burden of that tariff onto somebody else, just like they try to shift every other cost that they have onto whoever they sell the output to. And you know who that is? You and me. We're going to be stuck with rising prices just as soon as Americans have used up all of the inventory they built up over the last 6 months, watching Mr. Trump threaten tariffs on the whole world. Once they've used up those goods bought before the tariffs hit, then you're going to see the rising prices. And they're going to hurt Mr. Trump because, remember, he campaigned on promising the opposite, lower prices. They're not going lower. Have you seen a lot of them go lower? You haven't, because they don't. You're going to see them go much higher as the businesses offload the burden of those tariffs. It is amazing to watch the nonsense being spoken about how wonderful these are without anyone simply taking the public through the simple economics of what a tariff is and how it works. It's like, again, asking yourself, gee, why would the United States attack every other country in the world with tariffs, threaten them, tell them, look, you're going to have a hard time because American businesses are not going to want to have to pay a tariff. So they won't buy from you. They'll go somewhere else. And don't think they're going to all produce here in the United States. That's another make-believe Mr. Trump specializes in. I'm going to bring business back to America. No, you're not. You haven't done it yet. You didn't do it in your first presidency, and you're not going to do it now. And the reason, again, is simple. If Mr. Trump is enraging leaders around the world, and believe me, he is, every one of them, some of them have the courage to stand up and say so, like Mr. Lula in Brazil. Most of them say it to each other, say it to their local citizenry. Every leader on earth discovering that the country is subject to a tariff, which will make it harder for the producers in that country to sell in America because Americans have to pay that tax on what those countries sell. So they know it'll hurt them. They'll lose some business. And you know what every leader is going to do in the world? What they're already doing? Good leaders, bad leaders, those in between. They're doing exactly what you would expect. They're blaming the United States for their economic troubles. Even if that's only part of the reason, they now have a scapegoat. Mr. Trump has handed them that on a platter. So we have the world's leaders every day explaining to their people why the economic problems they face are caused by the United States. The cost of that to the future of this country exceeds by far everything Mr. Trump has promised. In short, it's all a con.
Once again, Professor Wolff, as promised, breaks it down without dumbing it down. And I got to say, Rick, one of the things that I think about when I hear you describing in such simple, easy to understand terms, it reminds me of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the German philosopher who talked about the theory of stupidity. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but I'll just lay it out. He argued that while evil can be confronted, stupidity is resistant to both reason and logic, and it makes it a powerful tool for those who are seeking to manipulate and control. And let's be very clear, Donald Trump is a grifter, a carnival barker, a master manipulator. And so what Bonhoeffer's theory suggests is that stupidity is a sociological phenomenon that is exacerbated by power and is utilized. And I really feel like that's what we're seeing happen here. And I'm wondering if you feel like that is an explanatory thing, or if I'm oversimplifying it.
No, I don't think you're oversimplifying, but I think what you're saying immediately poses a question. I don't think people are born stupid and live their lives that way. I think it's a problem. If people are behaving in a way that strikes us as stupid, the logical next question in my mind is, why are they behaving that way? What's producing it? And there I have an enormous feeling of empathy and sympathy for the American people. They have really been sold a bill of goods for a long time now. They've been told that the American dream, the idea that if you work hard in school and do reasonably well, you will get a good job and you'll be able to start a family and raise a family and live a decent life and retire and have time for yourself. All of those things, the car in the garage, the chicken in the pot, the vacation by the lake, all of those things. I remember as a child, I was born in Ohio, I grew up there. These are the things we thought we would get if we played by the proverbial rules. Well, for most of the American people, the statistics are crystal clear. That promise that you would have that, you can look forward to it. It would be the reward for your work, your study, your applying yourself, all of that. That was a lie. They haven't delivered. It's not that somebody was bad to you. It's not that. It's that the system in which you live doesn't provide that anymore. Not to you and not to most of the people. The top 20% in this country live that story. That's why they believe it's still true. And they don't want to face the fact that for 80% of the people, it isn't true anymore. And there's no prospect of it coming back. I think for the American people, to put it in a nutshell, it's been a shock to face that was even possible. No one told them you might not be able to get a job, or you might not get a job that pays you enough to ever settle down. You can't have a family. You can't have children. You can't. At every turn, even if no one says it in your face, you face it anyway. And that's a shock. And I'm not surprised that people who are in a shock don't pay close attention to that barker you talked about who says, I know what the problem is. For example, the problem is those immigrants. Oh my God, we're going to have that one run against us again? Country after country for centuries gets itself into a difficulty and blames whoever is the latest arrival, the immigrant. As I like to remind Americans, we are a nation of 330 million people. That's pretty big. The total number of undocumented immigrants in this country, according to Mr. Trump's own figures, are about 11 million at the most. There is no way. I'm a professor of economics. Take my word, please. There's no way that 11 million of the poorest people in the world are shaping the economy of 330 million Americans. Anyone who says that is, I'm going to be real nice, out of touch with reality. That's make believe. But you know, if you're shocked, if you're really upset that you haven't been able to give to your children the kind of future you and everyone else promised them, you might be tempted to believe that if only you could get rid of the immigrants, why then everything will change. Let me assure you, you can deport every poor soul that the ICE folks beat up, and you will not change the economic problems of the United States. Not only that, you'll probably make them worse. And you know why? Because the immigrants do the work of this country. They pick the fruits, they wash your car, they do the things at the bottom, as immigrants always do. And they get paid very poorly. And if you don't have 11 million of like those people doing those jobs, which is what most of them do, well, you're going to have to pay real money to American citizens to do it. And you know what happens to the price of the banana you eat or the apple that got picked for you? You're going to have to pay more for it because the wages are going to go up. Hello, have you thought about that? Deporting immigrants is an inflationary act. It may look good on TV. It may get Mr. Trump the votes of shocked, upset people looking for something they can do. But it is not a problem solver, and it will come back to haunt us in many ways as the story of our cruelty right now to immigrants will be told and retold in the future of this country.
I got to say, Professor, thank you. It was a masterclass in gently shifting the mistake. I think that I'll just acknowledge, because like you, I believe in good self-critique and constructive critique. It's ignorance, not stupidity. And I think that the shift that you made was powerful, and I thank you for it and doing it so gracefully. You know, I want to make sure there's several things I want to ask you about. I want to get you to set the tone, because I've been following you. I've been following your conversations with Professor Hudson, and you have really laid out why the U.S. empire is fading and why China is rising, just from a pure economics, macro global economics session. And I'm going to challenge you, give us that in a nutshell, as if you and I were at a pool hall or a bowling alley talking to my cousins.
All right, let me try. I'm very sensitive to, I'm aware of, as most Americans are, that China is frightening people. I'm aware that China has a society that has its own problems. What I'm about to tell you is not an endorsement of the Chinese or anything like that. I'm not naive. I understand societies have problems. They have strengths. They have weaknesses. None of them is all good and none of them is all bad. And if you don't understand that, then I think you haven't been paying much attention in the way that you said earlier. Having put that forward real quick, China developed an economic system trying desperately to do what every other poor country in the world has been trying to do, at least for the last century, if not much longer. and that is to stop being poor. 50 years ago, China would have been at the top of the list of the poorest places on this planet, and they wanted to get out of it. And one of the things they did is look long and hard at the United States as an example, because the United States began as a pretty poor country, an unimportant corner of the British Empire, and look what it became over the 200 years of its independent history. And that impressed the Chinese as it has impressed people around the world, and for good reason. The standard of living in this country was raised remarkably in those 200 years that are just over now. But the Chinese, unlike the other parts of the world, actually figured it out. They figured out how to raise the standard of living of their people. And here comes the part Americans have so much trouble with. They figured out how to do it better than we did it, which, by the way, shouldn't upset you. That's the history of the world. The new generation hopefully learns from the older generation. The later effort learns from the earlier effort how to do it better. We used to call that progress, and that's what it is. The Chinese figured out, don't have an economic system in which everything is run by private enterprises, because they mainly do what's good for the profits they're in business to get. You've got to have a whole bunch of ways of doing things that are not held hostage to profit. There are a lot of things society needs that aren't profitable to produce. And if you don't have some solution to that, you do without those. And the argument of the Chinese is that's why we have this state sector. We have the government own and operate enterprises. Why? Things that are not done efficiently and effectively, or not done at all by people who are interested in profit, can be done by the government because it doesn't have to run on the basis of profit. The government can take a step back and say, for example, we need this. I'll give you an example. The Chinese said, we need a modern rapid transit system. Airplanes have a lot of problems. We need fast, efficient rail. There was no way that private enterprise in China 20 years ago was going to invest in that. They weren't going to do it. China was too poor. It said they had all their usual reasons. So the Chinese government said, we see that a powerful, fast, rapid transit system for trains is crucial to the growth of the Chinese economy as a whole. So even though it isn't privately profitable, by making the society more cohesive through a train system, we will develop. They made it. They now have the greatest train system on this planet. We're not even close to what the Chinese already have, and they're building it out. They found this mixture, state and private, enable them to do stuff you can't do with something that's either private or state. It's that hybrid, it's that mixture that they have mastered. And we could learn from them, which we would like to do every bit as much as they learned from us, unless the political crap gets in the way, unless the people who are making a private bundle are so afraid of what might happen if the government had the right to do the things we need that the private sector doesn't do. The private sector runs the railroads. That's why they ran them into bankruptcy. That's why the government took over Amtrak. Come on, let's be a little honest here. Have a little self-criticism. Stop being lost in that we're the good guy, they're the bad. It's childish. And we ought to learn to outgrow it and not be prisoners of an outdated ideology.
What do you mean specifically? You mean like the idea of private enterprise basically having to compete with government provided services, right?
bingo, exactly. What in the world would make you not? The same head of company who gives a speech on the 4th of July about the lovely and wonderful things called competition. The minute you say, let's have the government compete with you as a way for you to be pressured to do better, oh no, oh no.
Yeah.
Then we're somehow violating some religious commitment we're supposed to have, rather than, be caught in the dilemma that the very thing we claim to be supportive of, competition, is immediately ruled out when the government. I mean, it's really terrible.
Yeah, it's childish, like you said. It's like, oh, you took away my toy.
Yeah, right. And then when the private sector gets crazy, which is a polite way of saying every 4 to 7 years we have an economic downturn. We're very worried that another one is going to hit us later this year, early next year. The financial press right now is full of those expectations. And then when they really destroy it. They create the kind of crash we had in 2008, or the kind of crash we had again in 2020. Here comes the irony. Where does the private sector go to bail us out of a critical moment when the economy looks like it's on the verge of collapse? They turn to the same government they ridicule every other chance they get. Where else are they going to turn? And so the thought might occur, if you weren't ideologically blinded, if we call the government in to bail out the failures of the private sector when it crashes, gee, maybe there's a role for the government all the time so we don't have the crashes. Whoa, what a new idea. But it isn't new. It's only new in a country that has been too afraid to look in the face of what's happening. Look, let me put it another way, and I don't mean to scare anyone. Everybody knows that the majority of the people in the world to this day live in poverty. They are not wealthy. They are hoping to get to a point where they can count on food, clothing, shelter, medical care, education, the basics of a good life. And they are asking themselves a fundamental question, just like Americans once did. How do we get out of this situation we're in and lift ourselves up to do better? Who's been doing that? Who can we learn from? And over the last 30 years, here's the one statistic I'll bore you with as a professor, because it's my job to know these statistics. The average annual growth of the American economy, percentage growth of the GDP, gross domestic product, which is just a measure of the goods and services the economy produces in 1 year. Every year for the last 30 years, it has grown in the United States on average about 2%, 2.5%. If you want to fudge the numbers a little bit, 3%. What has been the experience of the People's Republic of China over those 30 years? They have grown on average 6 to 9%. Friends, that's it. That's why they caught up. That's why they are now outproducing the United States on many, many items, with more added to that list each day. This has nothing to do with that they don't have problems. They do. Big ones, important ones. They're struggling in many ways. But when it comes to growing up out of poverty, which is the number one concern of the people of this planet, they're looking now to China, the way they once did to the United States, but they don't anymore. And all the pretending in the world will not change that hard reality.
You know, Rick, I gave you a challenge to break it down like anybody at a pool hall or a bowling alley could understand. And I don't know about you, Shane, but I could bring my cousins to this conversation. So I'm going to do the same thing. But before we do, y'all, I want to remind you, you watching and or listening to Redneck Gone Green with David Cobb and Shane Knight. This program is on the Democracy at Work platform, We are a non-corporately funded and filtered source of conversation where we don't just describe the problem, we bring you voices to people who can break it down without dumbing it down and give concrete things that we can do. Professor Wolff, I'm going to give you the same challenge. This time, you in that same pool hall or bowling alley, I want you to explain the similarities and differences between feudalism as an economic system, slavery as an economic system, and capitalism as an economic system. And to say, because I've heard you do this in a way that just, I'm just going to stop talking and say, walk people through as economic systems where they're similar and where they're different.
Okay, but before I do it, let me introduce the topic this way. We are at a time when the capitalist system, the one we've had for several centuries now, and that is the dominant system still in the world today, no question. But we are at a time in its history when, for the first time in a long time, maybe if ever, the question of its survival, of its continuation, is coming into question. People are critical. People are taking a second look and not liking what they see, whether it's the Chinese or people around the world watching Mr. Trump as the leader of the #1 capitalist country. So as this situation deepens, we're going to be looking at alternatives. If not capitalism, how are we going to organize our economy? People are asking that question. And we better pay attention to feudalism and slavery because they are alternatives. And there are already people, more than a few, who are beginning to talk about those systems as in some way maybe giving us a lesson, giving us a hint, giving us a piece of where we might go. So it's particularly appropriate for you to ask that question, David, and I appreciate the opportunity.
So when you say, I'm sorry, so when you say, because in my head, I'm like, all right, feudalism, lord, serf kind of thing, and then slavery, and then the whole MAGA movement of Make America Great Again. Which one is it? They want to go back to the feudalism part of it or the slavery part of it?
Very good. That's always been a mystery to me. Every time I've ever heard anybody tell me that going backwards is the way to get forwards, I realize I'm talking to a nut. But in any case, I don't want to be cruel here. But yes, the short answer to your question is MAGA doesn't understand what it wants to go back to. My guess is they want to go back to an idealized version. That's what most of the people who've ever looked backwards to a golden age, they used to call it. It's not a real story. It's a fantasy story. It's what is called by psychologists sometimes utopianism. It's you construct a wonderful time. You imagine we once had it, so you want to go back to it. I understand what's going on, but going backwards isn't the way to get to it because it's a fantasy in your head to begin with. And it's a mishmash of different parts. So let's take a quick real look at what those systems were to see whether there's something in it for us. All right, first, slavery. Slavery is a very simple system. What gets produced, goods and services, your food, your clothing, your shelter, whatever there is that you produce and consume, is handled by a very particular organization. The people who do the work use their brains and muscles to transform nature, a tree into a chair or a sheep into a shirt, whatever it might be. The people who do that are called slaves, and they're peculiarly related to the other people who are called masters, because the masters, who are few in number, and the slaves, who are large in number, that's how they've arranged to produce goods and services and to distribute them. The masters make all the decisions: what gets produced, how it gets produced, where it gets produced, and how you distribute the output. This is decided by the masters. It is a system which we in America have long ago fought a civil war to bring to an end because it has offended, for at least many of us, a basic morality, a basic Christian if you're Christian, but other moralities as well. Slavery existed in many parts of the world. By the way, has nothing whatever to do with race, whatever you think race means. White people have been slaves as often as black people. In our period of time, a bit more, Africa was literally taken for slavery. But before that, and for centuries, all kinds of people were slaves. That system has been put aside and rejected in most parts of the world. It barely holds on. It's not gone. It still sits there, and therefore it plays a role in what we think about, but it is pretty reviled, except for a few people, and we don't want to talk about those. All right, number 2, feudalism. That's completely different because, for example, in feudalism, there are no slaves. You can't have one person being the property of another person, the way a horse is a property of a person or a piece of land is a property of a person. You can't do that in feudalism. Interestingly, the rejection of slavery, which is part of feudalism. In Europe, feudalism comes at the end of the Roman Empire in the 5th century. That was the Roman Empire at that time had lots of slaves. The origin of Christianity comes during the slave period of the Roman Empire. But the feudalism of Europe that comes after the collapse of the Roman Empire wanted nothing to do with slavery. It was abolished. It was rejected. Well, then how did they reorganize the production of food, of clothing, of shelter, and so on? By organizing people, notice the influence here of slavery, once again into a small group of people at the top, telling a large group of people what to do in production. The large group, no longer slaves, had a different name, serfs. I'm using the European model. Similar things happened in other parts of the world. Serfs, they were individual, free. They weren't anybody's property, but they were tied to the land and they were tied to the small group of people who told them what to do, who got the name Lord, as in landlord, the person who owned the land or who had the right to tell the people on the land what to do. The serf was a serf because he or she was born of people who were serfs. You weren't free to be whatever you wanted. You were what your parents had been. So the serfs reproduced more serfs, and the masters reproduced more masters. And so the system reproduced itself. What gave the connection? Why did the serfs do what the lords told them? We know with slaves they did it because since they were the property of this master, if they didn't do what the master said, the master could starve them, the master could beat them, the master could pressure them in limitless ways. The stories are quite horrible, as we know from the slavery that existed in the American South before the Civil War. Feudalism doesn't have that. What feudalism has is a completely different arrangement. The lord and the serf enter into a relationship with one another. Very formal. I, John Smith, agree that I am your serf, dear Lord, whatever the guy's name was. This is a ceremony. And by the way, the most important institution in feudalism was the church. In the case of Europe, the Roman Catholic Church until the Reformation in the 15th century and so on. But for most of European feudalism's history, the church was there to sanctify the relationships and to say, you, John the serf, are now the serf of Louise, who's the Lord. Could be a woman, but it was sometime, etc. And this is sanctified by the church, by which I mean God himself is now telling you, you are in this relationship. That's why serfs didn't rebel as often as you might expect, because to rebel was to go against what the Holy Church had told you was God's will and plan for you. So the system lasted 1,000 years, European feudalism. It was able to reproduce. And those lords who had more and more serfs were able to get out of them production that we to this day visit as tourists. If you go to Europe, you go through France or Italy or Germany, and you look at the great chateaus, these spectacular products of the labor of serfs. If you have enough of them, you don't just make them cook your meal, you make them build your chateau in which they then cook your meal. But like every system, feudalism eventually drove the people in it to reject it. Just like in slavery, in the end, the slaves said, enough, no more. Took a long time. Many people died. Many people's societies crumbled. But the history of all of these systems is that they rise, they last, and then they die, as did feudalism. And the dying act of feudalism were the American and French revolutions at the end of the 18th century, happening almost at the same time. End of feudalism. When we had a war of independence against George III in England, we didn't say, okay, we're not part of you anymore. We're going to set up George IV, meaning George Washington. We didn't do that. We didn't want any more kings, queens, all that feudal lords, none of that. We wanted a republic. We were entranced with democracy. If you look at the speeches of Thomas Jefferson or any of the others, they wanted nothing to do with the old feudalism. They wanted capitalism, and they got it. No more lords and serfs, no more kings and queens. We are now going to have a new system, and how does it work? It's got no lords, no serfs, no masters, no slaves. Here's what it's got: employers and employees. And that's different. The employee isn't an employee because his parents were. He's not a serf. He doesn't owe any obligation. He doesn't stand in front of his employer and get sanctified by the church that you are now to do what this employer says. None of that. The employer has to pay you. If he doesn't pay you, you don't come to work. If he wants your work, got to pay you. It's a completely different relationship that didn't exist in feudalism and didn't exist with the slave. We are free, we tell each other. And Thomas Jefferson and all the others, we are free. We're not slaves. We're not serfs. We're employees who can choose to work for the employer or not. Don't like one employer? Go get another one. That was a kind of heady freedom. What they didn't want to face, which I'm now going to stress, is that capitalism definitely is a freer system than feudalism or slavery. That's true enough. And that's quite a credit for capitalism. It took us as a human race quite a few steps forward. And I'm not even getting to the technological changes that capitalism has brought with it. Capitalism is a progressive step in human development, but it also brought with it something that has to be faced, something that wasn't different from slavery and feudalism. And here it is. there's still a small group of people called employers who tell the rest of us what to do. When we enter the workplace, we cross the threshold and suddenly someone tells us, stand over there, sit over there, work with this machine, transform that raw material. Don't stay in the bathroom more than 15 minutes, blah, blah, blah. That part we have not yet progressed beyond. And that, in my humble opinion, and I'm not as humble as I appear, in that humble opinion, that's our job.
So, Rick,
the job of the slave to get out of that and the serf to get out of that. It's the job of the employees of this world. All of us here, right here, all of us watching and listening. That's our job. That's how we can be progressive in our time, the way our forefathers and mothers were progressive in their time. And if we want to honor them, then we need to be active in making that change now. Finally saying, wait a minute, the mistake of all those old systems was not to trust and believe in the capacity of the employees to run the system. We don't need any master, we don't need a lord, and we don't need the employer either.
So, Rick, we got 10 minutes left in the show, so I'm going to ask you to do technofeudalism and then bring us into what you, for the last 20 years that I've been following your work, have been really encouraging us to do, to go into worker ownership, because you've got a unique view of socialism that I think is really exciting to me. Here's how I'm going to set it up. When I think about what I heard from you, I think, the reason that I asked you to talk about those three systems were human labor as the means of production and who owns or controls that, and what is the relationship between the owner or the controller and the worker or laborer. Yanis Varoufakis has described the new era that we're in as technofeudalism. I've heard you break it down brilliantly. So I'm going to ask you in a very short time, describe this new current crisis of capitalism and technofeudalism and what is to be done.
Okay. The crisis of capitalism is in a way the culmination of its success. It has grown, it has competed its way forward, but we are now left with literally a handful of companies. If you look at the stock market today, it's held up by 11 companies. NVIDIA and Amazon, and their names. They're everywhere. They're where you shop, they're where you work, they're where you pay attention. They entertain you in the evening, they feed you in the afternoon. We are in a whole new place, which Yanis Varoufakis cleverly calls technofeudalism, because he wants people to understand we are at the end of this system in which a tiny number of people are running the show. When Mr. Trump was inaugurated on the 20th of January of this year, behind him on the platform sat those leaders of those half dozen corporations that dominate everything in the United States that happens on a daily basis. It was so gross. He didn't put there the great athletes of our system, the great poets, the great singers, none of it. It was the people who have the most money. Look at this Mr. Bezos. Look at all the money he has. It's a system that has gone nuts around that and given a level of power. Now with AI, now with all of the mergers together, it is becoming intolerable for anyone who has even a little bit of a commitment to democracy. And this feeling of it being intolerable, that was the end of feudalism when it became intolerable, and the end of slavery when it became intolerable. So we should be really concerned that Mr. Varoufakis understood that that's the nerve ending to touch, the one that makes it feel like this is outrageous and no longer tolerable. But in order for that to go somewhere, there has to be a sense of where we can go. Where can we go that will not make the world like this? And the answer is my answer, and the answer of people like me, and I'm far from the only one. We have to bring the democracy we've given lip service to right into the core of the economic system where we have never allowed it. We have to make democracy in the workplace. One person, one vote. Let us all together debate it, fight it out, disagree, work out a consensus. We have voting in our little communities because debate and voting and elections are at least the beginning of working it out. We say no one can be a member, can be a king or a mayor of a town or a congressperson or a president unless we have at least some role. I want that role to be bigger. I want the next economic system to be democracy in the workplace. One person, one vote. We run the enterprise as a community. If democracy was a good idea in the political life of the where we live, why wouldn't it be a wonderful opportunity in the world where we work? Come on, if you believe in democracy, why is it excluded in the workplace? Why is it when you go to work, somebody above you who you didn't choose tells you what to do? And if he's displeased with you, takes away your job, plunging your family into God knows what anxieties. And what are we doing to ourselves? The people at the top cannot do better than we can do for ourselves. That's why we got rid of kings and queens long ago. And we said we can govern ourselves. We don't need a king and queen. And did you notice we got rid of the kings and queens? The world didn't fall apart. It didn't come to an end. All the terrible predictions of what would happen if we didn't have a king and queen turned out to be empty. Guess what? If we don't have a boss at the job, if we don't have a board of directors, a CEO, we'll miss it as much as we miss the kings and the queens. It's a mistake we're making at our own expense, while the techno-feudal leaders, the Bezoses of the world, enjoy $100 million takeovers of the city of Venice in Italy. They're laughing all the way to the banks, which they also now own. This is a joke on us, and it's over. It's not funny anymore, and the time is right. And I think Americans are slowly groping their way to understand it and to begin to mobilize to achieve it.
Rick, I got to say, man, I love how you, again, just make it so easy to understand. And it does make me think, Shane, economic democracy or democracy at the workplace or democracy at work. Somebody ought to pick up on that phrase.
I think we're onto something here.
But look at here, Rick. I could just go on, but we really do, Shane and I, try to be respectful both of our guests and our viewers and listeners. So we're at the end of the hour. I want to just thank you so very much for this conversation. I want to thank you for giving the Democracy at Work platform to Shane and myself here at Redneck Gone Green. And I want to say this for real, y'all. If you have been inspired by this conversation, if it has helped you to see a way forward into economic democracy, I'm going to ask you to subscribe to Democracy at Work. Join me in becoming a supporter of this. Ain't nobody coming to save us, y'all. It's only going to be up to us. So every week we do the Redneck Gone Green on the Democracy at Work platform. Next week, Monday, 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern, we're going to bring you Yvonne Poirier, who is the director of REPES, and in the French, it is an acronym for basically the Intercontinental Social Solidarity Economy. So what Rick is talking about in a very specific U.S. context, we're going to bring a global perspective next week. In the meantime, I want to thank you for being a viewer, listener, a participant of this growing community. Keep on keeping on. Peace, y'all.